The envelope arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in March, just as 17-year-old Maya was finishing her afternoon practice session. Her mother called up the stairs, voice trembling with excitement. Maya knew immediately what it was. She'd been checking the mailbox every single day for 3 weeks. Her hands shook as she tore open the heavy cream paper. The letterhead was embossed in gold, Vienna Conservatory of Music. Her eyes scanned frantically until she found the word she'd been hoping for. "We are delighted to offer you a place in Maestro Victor Volkov's exclusive summer masterclass," Maya screamed. Actually screamed. Her mother rushed into the room and they both started crying and hugging each other. Her little brother peeked in, rolling his eyes at all the drama, but even he was grinning. This was huge. This was everything. Victor Volkov wasn't just any piano teacher. He was a legend. The man had performed at Carnegie Hall when he was 19. He'd played for presidents and royalty. His recordings of Beethoven's sonatas were considered definitive. And his master classes? They were notorious. Only 20 students from around the entire world would be selected. The application process alone had taken Maya 6 months. That night at dinner, her father kept reading the letter over and over, as if he couldn't quite believe it was real. They weren't a wealthy family. Her dad worked as an accountant. Her mom was a nurse. Piano lessons had always been a stretch for their budget, but they'd made it work because Maya loved it more than anything else in the world. "Vienna," her father said softly. "Our little girl is going to Vienna." The next 2 months were a whirlwind. Maya's teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, helped her prepare intensively. They chose Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3 for her showcase piece. It was ambitious, maybe even crazy ambitious. But Mrs. Rodriguez believed Maya could handle it. "This piece will push you to your limits," Mrs. Rodriguez warned during one lesson, her weathered hands demonstrating a particularly difficult passage. "But that's exactly what Volkov will want to see. He doesn't care about safe choices. He wants to see courage." Maya practiced until her fingers ached. She practiced until she could play entire movements in her sleep. Her friends barely saw her that spring. While they were going to prom and hanging out at the mall, Maya was in the practice room at school, running through the same measures hundreds of times until they were perfect. Her best friend Jenna tried to be supportive, but Maya could tell she didn't really understand. "It's just piano," Jenna said once, not meanly, just matter-of-factly. But it wasn't just piano. Not to Maya, it was her whole world, her future, her dream. Finally, June arrived. Maya's parents drove her to the airport at 4 in the morning. Her mother cried the whole way there. Her father kept giving her advice about staying safe in a foreign city, about not talking to strangers, about keeping her passport in a safe place. Maya barely heard any of it. Her mind was already in Vienna, already at the conservatory. The flight felt endless. Maya couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. She kept running through the Rachmaninoff in her head, her fingers twitching slightly against the armrest. The passenger next to her gave her a strange look, but Maya didn't care. When she finally landed in Vienna, it was like stepping into a dream. The city was beautiful in a way that made her chest tight. Old buildings with ornate architecture lined every street. Music seemed to float from every corner. This was the city of Mozart, of Beethoven, of Brahms, and now for one summer, it would be her city too. The conservatory had arranged housing for the students in a small hotel near the main building. Maya's room was tiny but clean, with a window that overlooked a cobblestone street. She unpacked quickly, too excited to rest despite the jet lag pulling at her eyelids. The master class didn't officially start for 2 more weeks, but Maya had arrived early on purpose. She'd learned that the conservatory allowed visiting students to use the practice rooms, and she wanted every possible minute to prepare. That very first evening, she found her way to the conservatory building and stood outside for a full 5 minutes, just staring up at it. The building was over 200 years old, all pale stone and tall windows. Maya pushed open the heavy wooden doors and stepped inside. The entrance hall took her breath away. High ceilings, marble floors, and the faint sound of piano music drifting from somewhere deep within the building. She felt like she'd walked into a cathedral, except instead of religion, this place worshipped music. A stern-looking woman at the reception desk checked her credentials and gave her access to the practice rooms. Maya found an empty one on the 3rd floor. The piano was a beautiful Bosendorfer, its black surface gleaming. She sat down at the bench and just breathed for a moment. Then she started to play. For the next 2 weeks, Maya fell into a routine. She'd wake up at 5 in the morning, grab a quick breakfast from the hotel, and be at the conservatory by 6. She'd practice for 3 hours, take a short break, then practice for another 3 hours. In the afternoons, she'd explore the city a little, grabbing lunch at small cafes, visiting music shops, soaking in the atmosphere. Then back to practice until the conservatory closed at 9. She was exhausted. She was also happier than she'd ever been. Other students started arriving as the start date approached. Maya met a girl from Japan named Yuki, who was brilliant at Chopin. There was a guy from Brazil named Leonardo who could make even the most serious pieces sound joyful. A quiet boy from Russia named Dmitri, who seemed to communicate more through his playing than through words. They were all incredibly talented, and Maya felt both intimidated and inspired by them. The night before the master class officially began, Maya could barely sleep. She kept thinking about what Volkov would be like in person. Would he be encouraging? Demanding? She'd heard stories. Everyone had heard stories. Volkov was famous for being brutally honest, sometimes to the point of cruelty. But he was also famous for producing extraordinary pianists. If you could survive his teaching, you could survive anything. The next morning, all 20 students gathered in the conservatory's grand performance hall. Maya had seen pictures of it online, but nothing prepared her for the real thing. The room was enormous, with rows of red velvet seats rising up in tiers. The stage held a magnificent Steinway grand piano that looked like it cost more than her family's house. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. The acoustics were supposed to be perfect. The students sat in the front rows, whispering nervously to each other. Maya sat near the back, suddenly feeling very young and very far from home. She clutched her folder of sheet music like it might protect her from whatever was coming. Then the side door opened, and Viktor Volkov walked in. The room went silent instantly. Volkov was in his late 60s, tall and imposing, with silver hair swept back from his face. He wore an expensive-looking dark suit and moved with the kind of confidence that came from decades of being treated like royalty. His eyes, a pale blue, swept across the assembled students with an expression that was hard to read. Not quite hostile, but definitely not warm. He walked to the center of the stage without saying a word, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Maya felt her heart hammering in her chest. This was it. This was really happening. Finally, Volkov spoke. His voice was deep and carried easily through the hall. "Welcome," he said, though the word sounded less like a greeting and more like a challenge. "I am Maestro Viktor Volkov, and for the next 6 weeks your lives belong to music. Everything else is irrelevant." He paused, his gaze moving from face to face. When his eyes passed over Maya, she felt a chill run down her spine. "Some of you will flourish here," Volkov continued. "Some of you will discover that you are not as talented as you believed. This is not a place for gentle encouragement or easy praise. This is a place for truth. And the truth, I promise you, is often painful." Maya swallowed hard. Around her, she could sense other students shifting uncomfortably in their seats. This was going to be intense. Part of her wanted to run back to the hotel and catch the next flight home. But a bigger part of her, the part that had been practicing 8 hours a day for 2 months, leaned forward in her seat. She'd come too far to back down now. The first 2 days of the master class were intense but manageable. Volkov lectured about technique, about the history of piano performance, about what separated good pianists from great ones. He was demanding and sharp-tongued, but he hadn't singled anyone out yet. Maya started to think maybe the horror stories had been exaggerated. Then came day 3. Performance day, Volkov had assigned each student a time slot to perform their prepared piece in front of the entire class. It was supposed to be a learning experience, a chance to receive feedback and improve. Maya was scheduled for the afternoon session right after lunch. She barely touched her food that day. Her stomach was doing flips. Yuki, sitting across from her in the conservatory's small cafeteria, noticed her pushing pasta around her plate. "You'll be fine," Yuki said quietly. "You're really good." "I've heard you practice," Maya managed a weak smile. "Thanks, I'm just nervous." "We all are," Leonardo chimed in from the next table. "Volkov makes everyone nervous. It's kind of his thing." When the afternoon session began, Maya took her seat in the audience and tried to focus on the other performances. A girl from Germany played Liszt beautifully. Dmitri, the quiet Russian boy, performed a Prokofiev piece that made the hair on Maya's arms stand up. Everyone was so talented. Maya felt her confidence slipping with each performance. Then Volkov called her name. "Miss Chen, you're next." Maya stood up, her legs feeling shaky. She walked to the stage, climbed the 3 steps, and crossed to the piano. The Steinway gleamed under the stage lights. She adjusted the bench, took a deep breath, and placed her hands on the keys. But before she could play a single note, Volkov's voice cut through the silence. "Wait." Maya's hands froze. She looked up. Volkov was standing now, studying a paper in his hands. Her application, she realized. "Miss Chen," he said, his voice carrying that particular tone professors use when they're about to make a point. "I see from your application that you come from a public school in America. Seattle, yes?" "Yes, Maestro," Maya said, her voice sounding small in the big hall. "And your primary instructor was—" He squinted at the paper. "Mrs. Rodriguez. Not a conservatory professor, I see. A local teacher." Maya felt heat creeping up her neck. Where was he going with this? "Mrs. Rodriguez is an excellent teacher, Maestro. She studied at Juilliard." Volkov made a dismissive gesture. "I'm sure she's adequate for teaching children's scales. But tell me, how many years have you seriously studied piano? And I mean serious study, not casual lessons." The way he said casual lessons made it sound like an insult. Maya's throat felt tight. "I've been playing since I was 5, Maestro." 12 years, Volkov actually laughed. It was a short, sharp sound that echoed unpleasantly through the hall. Several students shifted in their seats. Maya saw Yuki's face crease with concern. 5 years old in America, Volkov said, addressing the class now as if Maya was just an exhibit, not a person. "That probably means little songs on a keyboard. Twinkle, twinkle, little star and other nursery rhymes, yes? This is the problem with American music education. They start children early but without proper foundation, without understanding the discipline required." Maya's face was burning now. She wanted to defend herself, to defend Mrs. Rodriguez, to defend every hour she'd spent practicing. But her voice seemed stuck in her throat. "Well," Volkov continued, settling back into his chair, "let's see what passes for advanced technique in American public schools. Play your piece, Miss Chen." Maya's hands were trembling as she placed them back on the keys. She'd played this piece hundreds of times. She knew every note, every phrase, every dynamic change. But now, with Volkov's words ringing in her ears and 20 pairs of eyes watching her, everything felt different. She started the Rachmaninoff. The opening was soft, contemplative. Her fingers moved through the familiar patterns, and for a moment, she lost herself in the music. The first movement flowed well. She was doing okay. Maybe everything would be fine after all. Then came the second movement. There was a particularly complex passage about 3 minutes in, a section where both hands had to move in opposite directions while maintaining perfect timing. Maya had practiced this section more than any other. She knew it cold. But as she approached it, she became aware of Volkov leaning forward in his seat, watching her with those cold blue eyes. Her concentration wavered for just a second. Her left hand moved a fraction too late. The notes came out slightly off, not quite together. It was a small mistake, one that most people probably wouldn't even notice. Volkov noticed. He stood up suddenly and clapped his hands together 3 times, sharp and loud. The sound cracked through the hall like gunshots. "Stop. Stop playing." Maya's hands lifted off the keys as if they'd been burned. The last notes faded away, leaving awful silence. "This," Volkov said, walking toward the stage. "This is exactly what I was afraid of. Did you all hear that? Did you hear what happened in that passage?" He climbed onto the stage and stood next to the piano, looking down at Maya. She felt about 2 inches tall. "Technically, yes, you can play the notes," he continued. "Your fingers move. The right keys are pressed more or less, but there is no soul here, no understanding. You play this piece like you're reading a grocery list." Rachmaninoff poured his heart into this music. He wrote it while in exile, desperate and depressed, longing for his homeland. "And you play it like a computer program." Maya felt tears starting to burn behind her eyes, but she fought them back. She would not cry. She would not give him that satisfaction. "This is the problem with modern music education," Volkov said, turning back to address the class. Maya realized with horror that he was using her performance as a teaching example. All technique, no artistry. All precision, no passion. "Miss Chen here can hit most of the notes in the right order. Congratulations. So can a player piano." A few nervous laughs came from the audience. Maya felt like she might be sick. Real music requires understanding, Volkov continued, pacing across the stage now. It requires life experience, emotional depth, cultural knowledge. These are things that cannot be taught in after-school programs and weekend lessons. These require immersion, dedication, sacrifice. When I was 17, I was already performing professionally. I had studied under masters who understood that music is not just about playing notes correctly. It is about transformation, about taking the composer's soul and channeling it through your own. He stopped pacing and looked directly at Maya. What you played just now was not Rachmaninoff. It was a technical exercise. Accurate perhaps, but meaningless. Precision without passion is not music, Miss Chen. It is merely noise. The words hit Maya like physical blows. She sat frozen at the piano bench, her hands clenched in her lap. She wanted to say something, to defend herself, to explain that she did understand the piece, that she did feel the music. But what could she say? Volkov was the master. She was just a student. And he'd made his judgment clear. You may return to your seat, Volkov said dismissively. Maya stood up on shaking legs and walked back down the stage steps. The walk back to her seat felt like miles. No one would meet her eyes. Even Yuki looked down at her hands. Maya sank into her chair, feeling like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Volkov continued his lecture, using her performance as a case study for another 10 minutes. Each word felt like a knife. He talked about the dangers of American-style efficiency over European artistry. He questioned whether students from non-conservatory backgrounds were truly prepared for this level of instruction. He never said Maya's name again, but everyone knew exactly who he was talking about. When the session finally ended 2 hours later, Maya was the first one out the door. She practically ran back to her hotel room. Only when she was safely inside with the door locked did she finally let the tears come. She'd worked so hard. She'd practiced until her fingers hurt, until she dreamed in music. She'd given up everything for this opportunity. And Volkov had dismissed all of it in 5 minutes, made her feel small and talentless in front of everyone. Maya cried until she had no tears left. Then she lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she should just pack her bags and go home. Maybe Volkov was right. Maybe she wasn't good enough. Maybe she'd been fooling herself all along. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mom asking how things were going. Maya stared at it for a long moment. She couldn't tell her mother what had happened. Her parents had spent so much money to send her here. They were so proud of her. She texted back, "Everything's great. Learning a lot." Then she turned off her phone and closed her eyes, wishing she could disappear. Maya thought about quitting every single day for the next week, but something stubborn inside her refused to give up. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the thought of her parents' disappointed faces if she came home early. Or maybe it was something deeper. A quiet voice that whispered Volkov might be a brilliant pianist, but that didn't mean he was right about her. Still, the days were brutal. Volkov seemed to have decided Maya was his favorite example of everything wrong with modern music students. During lectures, he'd make offhand comments about students from less rigorous backgrounds while looking directly at her. When other students performed, he'd sometimes say things like, "At least you understand the emotional context, unlike some people." A few students tried to be supportive. Yuki would sit with Maya at lunch, talking about anything except piano. Leonardo told her a story about how Volkov had made him cry during his first master class 2 years ago. "He does this to everyone eventually," Leonardo said. "I think he believes breaking people down is part of teaching. It's messed up, but it's just how he is." But their kindness, while appreciated, didn't erase the sting of Volkov's words. Maya practiced harder than ever, trying to find this mysterious soul that Volkov claimed she lacked. But the harder she tried, the more mechanical her playing seemed to become. It was like thinking too hard about breathing and suddenly forgetting how to do it naturally. Then came the lecture that changed everything. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon. Volkov was talking about forgotten composers, musicians whose work had been lost to time or overshadowed by their more famous contemporaries. He seemed more animated than usual, almost enthusiastic as he described rare manuscripts and rediscovered scores. "There was a composer named Alessandro Moretti," Volkov said, pulling up an image on the screen. It showed a stern-looking man with wild, dark hair. He lived in Turin in the early 1800s, a contemporary of Chopin and Liszt. But unlike them, Moretti died in obscurity. His music was largely forgotten until about 5 years ago when a box of his manuscripts was discovered in a library basement. Volkov clicked to the next slide, showing pages of handwritten musical notation. Among these manuscripts was a piece called Fantasia in D minor, 3 movements, the final one marked Presto Diabolico. When I first saw it, I thought it might be Moretti's masterpiece. He paused and something flickered across his face. Was it embarrassment? Anger? Maya couldn't quite tell. I attempted to learn this piece 3 years ago, Volkov continued, his voice taking on a harder edge. I planned to record it, to be the first pianist to bring Moretti's lost work to the world, but the final movement proved to be problematic. Another pause. The room was completely silent. Everyone knew that Volkov never admitted to struggling with anything. The piece is unplayable, he said flatly. The final movement requires hand spans that exceed normal human anatomy. The tempo markings are impossible to maintain. The coordination required defies physiological limitations. Moretti either made errors in his notation, or he was quite simply mad. Some compositions are meant to exist only on paper, as intellectual exercises rather than actual performances. Something in Volkov's tone caught Maya's attention. It wasn't just matter of fact. There was defensiveness there, a need to justify why he hadn't been able to play it. For the first time since her humiliation, Maya felt a spark of something other than shame. It was curiosity, mixed with something that might have been defiance. After the lecture ended, Maya lingered in the hall. She approached Volkov's assistant, a tired-looking graduate student named Klaus, who managed the maestro's schedule and materials. "Excuse me," Maya said quietly. "That piece Maestro Volkov mentioned, the Moretti Fantasia. Does the library here have a copy of the score?" Klaus looked up from his tablet. "Yes, in the rare manuscript section." "Why?" Maya shrugged, trying to seem casual. "Just curious. I'd like to see what impossible actually looks like." Klaus gave her a knowing look like he'd seen this before. "3rd floor, east wing. Ask for Beatrice at the desk. She'll get it for you." The library was Maya's favorite part of the conservatory. It was all dark wood and high ceilings with the smell of old paper and polish. Beatrice, an elderly librarian with kind eyes, brought out the Moretti score carefully, as if it were made of glass. "Not many people ask for this one," Beatrice said. "Are you sure you want to look at it? It has a bit of a reputation." "I'm sure," Maya said. She found a quiet corner and opened the score. The first movement looked challenging but manageable, beautiful even. The second movement was more complex, with intricate passages that would require careful practice. But then she turned to the third movement, the Presto Diabolico, and her breath caught. It looked like chaos on the page. Notes were scattered across the staff in patterns that seemed to defy logic. There were passages where both hands had to reach enormous spans simultaneously. Sections where the tempo was marked so fast it seemed impossible. Rhythms that looked like they'd require 3 hands to play properly. Maya could see immediately why Volkov had given up. This wasn't just difficult. This was potentially impossible. But as she studied the score more carefully, something started to click in her mind. Yes, the reaches were huge, but what if you used the pedal strategically to sustain certain notes while your hands jumped to the next position? And that, impossible. Rhythm in measure 47. What if it wasn't meant to be played exactly as written, but rather suggested the feeling of that speed? What if Moretti had been writing down an idea, an emotion, rather than literal instructions? Maya spent 3 hours in the library that first day, just studying the score. She didn't try to play it, she just looked, analyzed, imagined. When the library closed at 9, she asked Beatrice if she could make a photocopy. Beatrice hesitated, then nodded. "Don't tell anyone I let you copy a rare manuscript," she whispered. That night Maya couldn't sleep. The Fantasia played in her head, a puzzle she desperately wanted to solve. Around 2 in the morning, she gave up on sleeping and studied the score by lamplight, making notes in the margins, trying to figure out fingerings that might work. The next morning, Maya was at the conservatory by 5:30. She found an empty practice room in the basement, far from where anyone would hear her. She didn't want anyone to know what she was attempting, especially not Volkov. She started with just the first page of the final movement. It took her an hour to work out the first 8 measures. Her hands cramped. She made mistake after mistake. But slowly, painfully, she started to find a way through it. Over the next 2 weeks, Maya fell into a secret routine. She'd attend the required masterclass sessions enduring Volkov's continued jabs. She'd practice her assigned pieces. But then, in the early mornings and late evenings, she'd work on the Moretti. It became an obsession. The Fantasia was like a code she needed to crack. Every time she figured out a particularly difficult passage, she felt a rush of triumph. Every time she played through a section smoothly, even once, she felt like she was proving something. Not to Volkov. Not yet. To herself. Yuki noticed Maya was disappearing. "Where do you go so early?" she asked one morning, catching Maya sneaking out of the hotel at 5. "Just extra practice," and Maya said vaguely. "You're going to burn yourself out," Yuki warned. But she smiled. "Whatever you're working on, you look happier than you have in weeks." It was true. Despite the exhaustion, despite her fingers being constantly sore, Maya felt more alive than she had since the humiliation. The Fantasia was giving her something she'd lost: purpose. She wasn't practicing to please Volkov anymore. She was practicing because she wanted to, because the challenge itself was intoxicating. The piece was brutal. There were days when Maya wanted to throw the score across the room. The third movement alone was more difficult than anything she'd ever attempted. Her right hand had to fly across the upper register while her left created thunderous patterns in the bass. There were moments when she was convinced Volkov was right, that it truly was impossible. But then she'd break through another barrier. She'd figure out a creative fingering or a way to use the pedal that made a passage suddenly playable. Each small victory fueled her determination. By the end of the 3rd week, Maya could play the first 2 movements straight through. They were beautiful, haunting pieces that deserved to be heard. The 3rd movement was still a struggle, but she was making progress. More importantly, she was understanding the piece in a way that went beyond technique. She could feel what Moretti had been trying to express, something wild and desperate and defiant. One evening, Leonardo caught her coming out of a practice room at midnight. "Maya, seriously, what are you working on?" he asked. "I walked by earlier and heard something I didn't recognize. It sounded insane." Maya hesitated. Then something made her tell him. Maybe she needed to say it out loud to make it real. "I'm learning the Moretti Fantasia, the one Volkov said was impossible." Leonardo's eyes went wide. "Are you serious? Why would you do that to yourself?" Maya smiled, and it was the first time in weeks that the smile reached her eyes. "Because he said I play like a computer. He said I have no soul." Well, if I can play the piece he couldn't, maybe he'll have to admit he was wrong. "And if you can't play it?" Leonardo asked gently. Maya thought about that. "Then at least I'll know I tried. At least I'll know I didn't just accept his judgment and give up." Leonardo shook his head, but he was grinning. "You're either really brave or really crazy. Maybe both. When are you going to play it?" "The final performance," Maya said. "End of the program, that's what I'm aiming for." "That's in 3 weeks," Leonardo said. "Can you learn it in 3 weeks?" Maya looked down at her hands. They were tired, the fingertips slightly raw from hours of practice. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I'm going to try." 3 weeks had never felt so short and so long at the same time. Maya's days blurred together in a haze of practice, exhaustion, and determination. She was running on maybe 5 hours of sleep a night. Her fingers had developed calluses on top of calluses, but the Moretti Fantasia was coming together, piece by piece, measure by measure. The hardest part wasn't the technical difficulty, though that was brutal enough. The hardest part was keeping it secret. Every time she wanted to ask Klaus for advice on a difficult passage, she had to stop herself. Every time Yuki offered to listen to her practice, Maya had to make excuses. She couldn't risk anyone telling Volkov what she was planning. On the 4th, Week Volkov made an announcement during morning lecture. The master class will conclude with a final performance. Each of you will play one piece of your choosing before a panel of judges and distinguished faculty members. This performance will determine who receives the Certificate of Excellence from this program. The certificate was a big deal. It could open doors to conservatories, to competitions, to professional opportunities. Maya had come to Vienna dreaming of earning it. After her humiliation, she'd assumed it was out of reach. But now, with the Fantasia, she had a chance. A crazy, impossible chance. You will submit your piece selection to Klaus by Friday. Volkov continued. Choose wisely. This is your opportunity to demonstrate everything you've learned this summer. That evening, Maya finally played the entire Fantasia from beginning to end for the first time. It wasn't perfect. There were still rough spots, moments where her fingers stumbled. But she made it through all 3 movements without stopping. When the final chord faded away in the empty practice room, Maya sat back and realized she was shaking. It was possible. Difficult, yes, terrifying, absolutely. But possible. She submitted her piece selection the next day, writing simply, Fantasia in D minor by Alessandro Moretti, on the form. Klaus looked at it, did a double take, and stared at her. You're joking, he said. I'm not, Maya replied calmly. Does Maestro Volkov know about this? He will on the night of the performance. Klaus opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, then closed it. He shook his head slowly. You're either very brave or very foolish. Probably both. People keep telling me that, Maya said with a slight smile. Word spread quickly among the students. By dinner time, everyone knew what Maya was planning. The reactions were mixed. Some thought she was inspired. Others thought she was setting herself up for an even worse humiliation than before. Dmitri, the quiet Russian boy, found her after dinner. I heard what you're playing, he said in his heavily accented English. I think it's good. Volkov, he needs to be reminded that he is not God. Yuki was more worried. Maya, what if you can't? Pull it off? What if you mess up in front of everyone? He'll destroy you. He already destroyed me, Maya said quietly. What more can he do? The final week was torture. Maya practiced 12 hours a day. Her back ached from sitting at the piano. She had to tape up her fingers because the skin was getting raw. Mrs. Rodriguez called from Seattle, and Maya almost broke down and told her everything, but she didn't want to worry her teacher. She just said everything was fine. She was learning a lot. She'd tell her all about it when she got home. The other students were preparing too. Maya heard snippets of their pieces floating through the practice room doors. Chopin nocturnes, Beethoven sonatas, listitudes. All beautiful, all impressively difficult. But none of them were playing something their teacher had declared impossible. The night before the performance, Maya couldn't practice anymore. Her hands were too tired, her mind too frayed. She went for a walk through Vienna instead, letting the cool evening air clear her head. She found herself at a small church and went inside. She wasn't particularly religious, but something about the quiet peace of the space felt right. She sat in a pew and thought about why she was really doing this. Yes, it was partly to prove Volkov wrong, but it was more than that. It was about proving to herself that she was more than his criticism, that she could take something everyone said was impossible and make it real through sheer determination and will. Her phone buzzed. A text from her dad. Tomorrow's your final performance, right? We're so proud of you, honey. No matter what happens, you've already succeeded by getting into that program. We love you. Maya felt tears sting her eyes. Her parents had no idea what she was about to attempt. They didn't know about the humiliation or the secret practices or any of it. They just believed in her, simply and completely. She texted back, Thanks, Dad. I love you too. I'm going to make you proud. Then she went back to the hotel and surprisingly slept. The next evening arrived faster than Maya was ready for. The performance was at 7 in the Grand Concert Hall. By 6:30, students were warming up backstage, the nervous energy almost visible in the air. Maya found a quiet corner and ran through some scales, loosening up her fingers. Leonardo came over, looking sharp in his concert clothes. You ready? No, Maya said honestly. But I'm doing it anyway. That's the spirit, he grinned. I'm rooting for you. We all are. Well, except maybe Volkov. At 7 precisely, the doors opened and the audience filed in. Maya peeked through the stage curtain. The hall was packed. Faculty members in formal attire filled the front rows. The judging panel sat at a special table to the side. And there, in the center seat, was Volkov, looking stern and important in a black suit. The performances began. One by one, students took the stage and played their hearts out. The German girl played a Brahms intermezzo that was absolutely gorgeous. Dmitri's Prokofiev was wild and passionate. Yuki's Chopin made several people in the audience dab at their eyes. Everyone was incredible. Maya was scheduled near the end. She watched from backstage, her stomach doing flips, her palms sweating. She kept flexing her fingers, terrified they'd lock up when she needed them most. Finally, Klaus appeared at her elbow. "You're next, Maya." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She walked to the stage entrance and waited as Leonardo finished. His piece, a joyful Brazilian-influenced composition that got enthusiastic applause. He came off stage and squeezed her shoulder as he passed. "Break a leg," he whispered. "Or don't. That would make playing harder." She almost laughed, which helped. Then she heard her name called. Miss Maya Chen. Maya walked onto the stage. The lights were bright, the audience a sea of shadowy faces. The Steinway waited for her, glossy black and perfect. She'd played on this piano dozens of times over the past 6 weeks, but it had never felt quite like this. She sat at the bench, adjusted it slightly, and looked up at Volkov. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not hostile exactly, but definitely skeptical. Like he was waiting for her to prove him right. Klaus, serving as announcer, stepped forward with his clipboard. "And what will you be playing for us this evening, Miss Chen?" This was it. The moment of no return. Maya took a breath and spoke clearly, projecting her voice so everyone could hear. The Fantasia in D minor, by Alessandro Moretti. The effect was immediate. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Several faculty members exchanged surprised glances. The other judges turned to look at Volkov, who had gone completely still. He leaned forward in his seat, his expression shifting from skepticism to something harder. When he spoke, his voice carried across the hall. "That piece is unplayable, Miss Chen. I hope you have an alternative prepared." Maya met his eyes. For the first time in 6 weeks, she didn't feel small or intimidated. She felt strong. "No, Maestro," she said firmly. "No alternative. Just this." Volkov's jaw tightened. For a long moment, he said nothing. The entire hall held its breath. Then he made a curt gesture. "Proceed, though I warn you this will not end well." Maya turned back to the piano. Her hands were steady now. All the nerves, all the fear had crystallized into pure focus. She'd worked too hard to doubt herself now. She placed her fingers on the keys and began to play. The first movement flowed out like water in moonlight. Soft, mysterious, building slowly. Maya let herself sink into the music, forgetting about Volkov, about the judges, about everything except the notes and the emotion behind them. Moretti had written something beautiful here, something that deserved to be heard. The second movement was more intense, the tempo increasing, tension building with every measure. Maya's fingers danced across the keys, her body swaying slightly with the music. She could feel the piece working, could sense the audience leaning forward, drawn in. Then came the third movement, the presto diabolico, the impossible part. Maya took one quick breath and launched into it. Her hands became a blur of motion. The right hand flew up the keyboard in cascading runs while the left hand thundered in the bass. The reaches that had seemed impossible on paper became possible through creative fingering and strategic pedaling. The rhythms that looked wrong on the page suddenly made sense in the air, creating the feeling Moretti had been chasing. But more than the technique, more than the difficulty, Maya played with everything she had. Every ounce of frustration from being humiliated, every hour of lonely practice, every moment of doubt and determination. It all poured through her fingers into the piano and out into the hall. This wasn't playing to prove herself. This was playing because the music demanded it. Because Moretti's forgotten masterpiece deserved to exist as more than just marks on paper. Because sometimes the only way to answer criticism is to let your work speak for itself. The final section approached, a last violent climb to the closing chord. Maya's arms ached, her fingers burned, but she didn't slow down. She drove toward the ending with fierce determination, the music swelling to fill every corner of the hall. And then, the final chord. Maya struck it with all her strength, letting it ring out, fade slowly into silence. For a moment, nothing. Complete silence. Maya sat at the piano, breathing hard, her hands still on the keys. Then the hall erupted. The applause hit Maya like a physical force. People weren't just clapping. They were on their feet, some of them cheering. Faculty members who'd been sitting stiffly in their formal wear were standing and applauding enthusiastically. Even the usually composed judges looked stunned. Maya stood slowly from the piano bench, her legs shaking. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. The piece everyone said was impossible. The piece that had defeated one of the world's greatest pianists. And she'd played it all the way through. She looked out at the audience, still trying to process what was happening. Yuki was crying and clapping at the same time. Leonardo was whistling with his fingers in his mouth. Dmitri had both fists raised in the air like she'd just won a boxing match. Then Maya's eyes found Volkov. He was still sitting while everyone around him stood. His face was unreadable, frozen somewhere between shock and something else. Their eyes met across the hall, and for a long moment neither looked away. Maya didn't smile or gloat. She just looked at him steadily, letting the music speak for itself. Finally, slowly, Volkov stood. He didn't clap, but he gave a single small nod. It was barely noticeable, but Maya saw it. Recognition, acknowledgement, maybe even a tiny shred of respect. Maya bowed to the audience and walked off stage on trembling legs. The moment she was out of sight, her knees nearly gave out. Klaus caught her elbow. "That was incredible," he said, his eyes wide. "I've never seen anything like it." "Nobody has. You just played a piece that's been sitting in our library for 5 years because everyone assumed it couldn't be done." Backstage was chaos. Students surrounded Maya, all talking at once. How long had she been practicing? How did she figure out the fingerings? Did she know she'd just made history? Yuki hugged her tight. "I can't believe you kept that secret for weeks." "You were practicing that the whole time?" "Every morning at 5:30, Maya admitted, still feeling dazed. "I couldn't let anyone know, especially not Volkov." "Well, he knows now," Leonardo said with a huge grin. "Did you see his face?" That was the face of a man whose entire worldview just got challenged. There were still 3 more students scheduled to perform, so Maya had to quiet down and let them have their moment. But she could barely focus on their pieces. Her heart was still racing, adrenaline pumping through her veins. She kept replaying the performance in her mind, hardly believing it had really happened. When the final performance ended, all the students were called back on stage for closing remarks. The head of the judging panel, a distinguished professor named Dr. Hoffman, stood to speak. "This has been an extraordinary evening," he said, his voice carrying through the hall. "We have witnessed exceptional talent from all of you, but I must acknowledge something unprecedented. Tonight we heard the first complete performance of Moretti's Fantasia in D minor, a piece many of us believed would remain unperformed forever." He turned to look directly at Maya. "Miss Chen, your performance was not just technically remarkable. It was artistically mature beyond your years. You brought to life a composition that has languished in obscurity, and you did so with passion, intelligence, and courage." More applause. Maya felt her cheeks burning, but this time not from shame, from pride. The judges deliberated for 20 minutes while students and audience members mingled in the lobby. Maya was surrounded by people wanting to talk to her. Faculty members asked her questions about her technique. Other students wanted to know every detail. A woman who identified herself as a talent scout for a major concert series asked for her contact information. It was overwhelming in the best possible way. But Maya kept glancing around looking for Volkov. He'd disappeared immediately after the performances ended. She had no idea where he'd gone or what he was thinking. Finally, everyone was called back into the hall for the announcement. Maya's heart pounded as Dr. Hoffman took the stage again. "The judges have made their decision," he said, "and I'm pleased to announce this year's Certificate of Excellence goes to Miss Maya Chen." The applause was thunderous. Maya walked to the stage in a daze, accepted the certificate and handshake from Dr. Hoffman, and somehow managed not to cry. Behind her, she could hear her fellow students cheering. They were genuinely happy for her. After everything, that might have meant the most, but the surprises weren't over. Dr. Hoffman held up his hand for quiet. Additionally, 3 judges would like to extend special invitations to Miss Chen, Professor Werner from the Berlin Conservatory, Madame Dubois from the Paris Academy, and I myself would like to offer full scholarship opportunities for continued study. Maya's jaw dropped. Full scholarships to 3 of the most prestigious music schools in Europe. She looked out at the audience and saw the 3 judges smiling at her. This was real. This was actually happening. The reception afterward was a blur. People kept congratulating her, pressing business cards into her hands, asking about her plans. Maya answered as best she could, but her mind was spinning. Just 6 weeks ago, she'd been a girl from Seattle with big dreams. Then those dreams had been crushed, and now they were coming back bigger than before. Around 9 o'clock, as the crowd was thinning, Klaus approached her again. "Someone left this for you," he said quietly, handing her a sealed envelope. "He asked me to give it to you after everything was over." Maya didn't need to ask who he was. The envelope was heavy cream paper, expensive. Her name was written on it in elegant handwriting. She found a quiet corner and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with just a few lines written in the same careful script. "Miss Chen, I have taught piano for 40 years. In that time, I believed I had seen everything, understood everything about music and what it requires. Tonight, you taught an old man that he was wrong. You showed me that true artistry is not about perfect training or prestigious backgrounds. It is about determination, creativity, and the courage to attempt what others declare impossible. I judged you based on where you came from rather than who you were. That was my failure, not yours. What you played tonight was not just technically brilliant. It had the soul I accused you of lacking. Perhaps it was there all along and I was too blind to see it. I hope you can forgive a foolish old man who confused his own limitations with universal truth. You have a great future ahead of you. Do not let anyone, especially arrogant maestros, tell you otherwise. With sincere respect, Viktor Volkov." Maya read the note 3 times, tears blurring the words. It wasn't just an apology. It was an admission that she'd been right to keep going, to refuse to accept his judgment as final truth. She carefully folded the note and put it in her bag. She would keep it not as a trophy but as a reminder that other people's opinions, even experts, even legends, were still just opinions, a reminder that the only person who could define her limits was herself. The next morning, Maya had to pack and prepare to return home. It felt surreal to be leaving Vienna after everything that had happened. As she was checking out of the hotel, she ran into Yuki in the lobby. "I'm going to miss you," Yuki said, hugging her tight. "Promise you'll stay in touch?" "Of course," Maya said. "And who knows? Maybe we'll end up at the same conservatory." "I hope so," Yuki smiled. "You know, watching you these past weeks taught me something. I've always been so careful, so afraid of making mistakes, but you took the biggest risk possible and it paid off. That took guts." As Maya's taxi drove her to the airport, she looked back at the conservatory one last time. 6 weeks ago, she'd arrived here feeling like she had something to prove. Now she was leaving knowing she'd proven it, but more importantly, knowing she didn't need to prove anything to anyone but herself. On the plane home, Maya couldn't sleep despite her exhaustion. She kept thinking about the Moretti Fantasia, about those weeks of secret practice, about the moment her hands found their way through passages that were supposed to be impossible. She thought about Volkov's note, about his admission that he'd been wrong, but most of all, she thought about what came next. She had scholarship offers to consider, her senior year of high school to finish, decisions to make about her future. The world felt full of possibility in a way it never had before. When the plane landed in Seattle, Maya saw her parents waiting at arrivals. Her mom was holding a welcome home sign and her dad was grinning from ear to ear. They didn't know the full story yet. They didn't know about the humiliation or the impossible peace or any of it. Maya would tell them everything eventually, but first she just ran to them and let them hug her tight. "So how was it?" her father asked. "Did you learn a lot?" Maya laughed. "Dad, you have no idea. I learned more than I ever expected, just maybe not in the way I thought I would." "Did you get the certificate?" her mother asked. Maya pulled it out of her bag and showed them. Her mother actually squealed and her father's eyes got misty. They were so proud, so happy for her. And Maya realized that their pride hadn't been conditional on any certificate or achievement. They'd been proud of her the whole time, just for trying, just for following her dream. That night, back in her own room, Maya sat at her family's old upright piano. It wasn't a Steinway or a Bosendorfer. The middle C stuck sometimes and a few keys were slightly out of tune. But it was the piano where she'd learned to play all those years ago. The piano where she'd practiced for countless hours, dreaming of bigger stages. She played through the Moretti Fantasia one more time, softly so she wouldn't wake anyone. And as her fingers moved through the impossible passages, she smiled, because she'd learned the most important lesson of all. The only thing that's truly impossible is the thing you never try. Everything else is just difficult. And difficult wasn't something that scared Maya anymore. Difficult was just another word for interesting. Another word for worth it. Another word for possible.